Hello, and welcome to Mysterious Sleep Tales. It's wonderful to be here to relax and spend the evening. There's nothing left to do tonight, nothing that requires attention, nothing that can wait until morning. The hours ahead belong only to the slow, unhurried flow that comes when you surrender to rest and tranquility. No ruse, nowhere to go. The outside world goes on as usual, but you are here, and this place is completely safe and completely silent. Soon I will take you to a quiet place. A warm, enclosed place where the air smells of paper, putty, and a faint scent of coal smoke. A small, softly lit room, where the only sounds are the gentle rustling of cardboard and the occasional creaking of old floorboards. But there's no rush to get there. At our own time, we will arrive as slowly as you wish, and when we do, you will find it to be the kind of place where you can close your eyes and simply listen for a while. So let your breath carry you. Let each slow breath bring you one step closer to that quiet room, and know that everything is as it should be. Sometime in the 1880s, a winter evening in London. It doesn't really matter the exact year or the specific street, but if you walk among the narrower alleys south of Oxford Street, you'll find yourself in a place where more modest commerce has replaced the grand avenues. The shops on this particular street are small and private. Each occupies the ground floor of a 3- or 4-story building of dark London brick, and their facades, though not grand, possess the quiet nobility of businesses that have served their purpose for many years. The sky above the rooftops has long since turned to dark, heavy gray. The last remnants of a winter afternoon have long since vanished. The street lamplighter has long since passed, and the gas lamps lining the pavement cast their familiar greenish glow onto the damp cobblestones below. There's a thin mist tonight, not literally a mist, but something lighter, the kind of dampness that clings to wool and leaves tiny droplets on the shop windows. It's cold, hard and steady, the kind of cold that chills you to the bone if you remain motionless for too long, and thin columns of coal smoke rise from the chimneys above and disappear into the darkening air. Most of the shops on this street have already closed for the evening. Their shutters are drawn, their awnings folded, and only a very faint lamplight can be seen from the rooms upstairs where the shop owners and their families have retired for dinner. A cheese shop's window is dark. A stationery shop's door is bolted. A small shop selling buttons, thread, and cut ribbon has drawn its heavy green curtain over the glass. But in the middle of the street, there is one shop where a low, amber light is still burning. With a modest facade no wider than a single window and a narrow doorway, the building has a hand-painted sign on its lintel, meticulously retouched over the years, in gold-gilded lettering that reads, E. Hadwell Son, Hatbox Manufacturers, founded 1851. The door is painted a dark bottle green, and the brass handle, though unpolished, has been smoothed by decades of handwork. Through the window, if you were to press your face close to the cold glass, you would see the interior of the workshop, which is also the shop itself. For in establishments of this size, there is little distinction between the two. The room is not large. It is perhaps 12 feet deep and no more than 9 feet wide, with a low ceiling crossed by a single beam of darkened oak. The walls are lined with shelves, and upon those shelves, arranged with considerable care, are hat boxes. They are stacked neatly, some 2 deep, some 3 high, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. There are tall, cylindrical boxes designed to house a gentleman's top hat, covered in a robin's egg blue paper that has been pasted smooth and finished with a thin border of navy trim. There are wider, shallower boxes intended for ladies' bonnets. These covered in a cream paper printed with a delicate pattern of climbing roses. There are smaller boxes, round and sturdy, meant for bowler hats and traveling caps, and these are finished in a plain brown paper with the shop's name stamped in dark ink upon the lid. Each box has been made by hand. Each one has been measured and cut and folded and pasted and pressed and allowed to dry, and then measured again and trimmed and finished with ribbon or cord or a simple latch of tin. The craft is not glamorous. It does not draw crowds or earn mention in the London papers. But it is steady, and it is precise, and it has sustained the Hadwell family through 3 decades of changing fashions and shifting tastes in headwear. The man working inside the shop this evening is not the original E. Hadwell. That was Edwin, who founded the business in the year of the Great Exhibition and who passed away quietly in the winter of 1879, but rather his son, Edward, who has carried on the trade since his father's death. Edward is somewhere in his middle 40s, a man of average height and modest build, with graying hair at the temples and the sort of careful, steady hands that come from a lifetime of measuring and cutting. He is standing at the workbench, which occupies the center of the room and serves as the heart of the entire operation. It is a solid piece of furniture, built from elm, its surface scarred and stained by years of paste and glue and the faint impressions of countless pencil marks. Upon it this evening are the materials of his craft, arranged in the particular order that suits his habits. A sheet of pasteboard, gray and smooth, lies flat beneath a wooden straight edge. Beside it, a pair of heavy shears rests with its blades slightly open. There is a pot of paste, made from flour and water and a small measure of alum, covered with a cloth to keep it from drying. A roll of paper, the kind used to cover the exterior of the boxes, leans against the wall behind the bench. It is a pleasant paper, a soft sage green, and it came in a delivery from the paper merchant on Aldersgate Street earlier that week. Edward is not hurrying. The last customer of the day came and went more than an hour ago, a clerk from one of the insurance offices on Threadneedle Street, who had ordered a box for a new silk top, his wife had purchased for him as a Christmas gift. Edward had taken the man's measurements, noted the height of the crown and the breadth of the brim, and promised the box would be ready within the week. He had written these figures in a small ledger that he keeps on a shelf behind the counter, using a pencil that he sharpens each morning with a pocket knife. Now, with the door closed and the latch turned, Edward is tending to the work that remains. He is not making a new box this evening. The hour is too late for that, and the paste needs good light and fresh air to cure properly. Instead, he is finishing a box that he began earlier in the day, a medium-sized round box destined for a Mrs. Fenton of Kensington, who requires it for a winter bonnet trimmed with velvet and a cluster of artificial violets. The box is nearly complete. Its body is formed, its base is secured, and the exterior paper, a soft ivory with a faint pattern of pale gold lattice, has already been smoothed and pressed into place. What remains is the handle. Edward reaches for a length of grosgrain ribbon, the color of dark plum, which lies curled upon the bench like a sleeping cat. Grosgrain is his preferred ribbon for handles. It has a firmness to it that satin lacks, a ribbed texture that sits well in the hand and does not slip or stretch under the modest weight of a hat box. He has used it for years, ordering it by the bolt from a haberdasher on Cheapside, and the particular shade of plum has become something of a signature for his boxes, though he has never thought of it in those terms. It is simply the ribbon he uses. It is the ribbon his father used before him. He measures a length against the box, holding it taut between his fingers, and then cuts it with a quick, clean motion of the shears. The sound is brief and crisp, the only sharp noise in the room, and then it is gone and the quiet returns. He folds the cut ends under, creating a neat, doubled edge at each end that will not fray, and then he reaches for the paste pot. With a small, flat brush, a brush that was once part of a set his father purchased from Chandler near Covent Garden in the 1850s, he applies a thin, even layer of paste to the underside of each folded end. The paste is cool and smooth, and it carries that particular scent of flour and damp paper that has been part of this room for as long as anyone can remember. He presses the ribbon ends firmly against the inside wall of the box, one on each side, and holds them in place for a moment, counting silently to himself. It is a habit he learned from his father, who believed that 60 seconds of steady pressure was sufficient to bond ribbon to pasteboard, provided the paste had been properly mixed. Edward has never questioned this. He simply counts, and when he reaches the appropriate number, he lifts his fingers and inspects the join. It is clean. It is straight. The ribbon handle arcs gently above the lid, forming a loop that is wide enough for a gloved hand but not so wide that it will catch on the edge of a hansom cab's door. The coal fire in the small cast-iron grate at the far end of the room has settled into a low, steady burn. It is not a roaring fire. It is the sort of fire that one tends to in the evening when the hard work of the day is done and what remains is the quieter work of closing up. The coals glow a deep, shifting orange, and every now and then, without any apparent cause, one of them cracks softly and resettles against its neighbor, sending a faint cascade of ash into the grate below. The sound is small and brief, almost like a whisper, and it adds to the atmosphere of the room rather than disturbing it. Edward sets the finished box aside, placing it on the end of the workbench where the paste can dry undisturbed overnight. He wipes his hands on a square of cotton cloth that he keeps tucked into the pocket of his apron, a canvas apron that was once a deep brown but has faded over the years to something closer to the color of milky tea. He stands still for a moment, looking at the shelves of boxes around him, not with the eye of a tradesman assessing his stock, but simply looking the way one does when a long day is drawing to its close and the mind begins to loosen its grip on the details of commerce. The shutters on the front window are still open, and through the glass he can see the lane outside, glistening faintly in the gaslight. A carriage passes at the far end, its wheels rattling briefly over the cobblestones before the sound fades into the distance. A dog barks once, somewhere several streets away, and then is silent. The mist has thickened slightly, and the gas lamp nearest the shop now wears a soft halo of diffused light, as though the flame inside its glass enclosure has breathed out a ring of gold. Edward walks slowly to the window and reaches for the wooden shutters. They are interior shutters, paneled and painted the same bottle green as the door, and they fold inward on brass hinges that he oils twice a year, once in spring and once in autumn. He draws the left shutter first, guiding it gently into place, and then the right, and as they close, the view of the lane is replaced by the quiet presence of painted wood. The room feels a degree warmer almost immediately, as though the shutters have sealed in not just the heat of the coal fire, but the particular warmth of the room itself, the warmth of paper and paste and finished cardboard, and 35 years of careful, patient work. The sound of the street is muffled now. The faint clip of hooves, the distant murmur of voices from the public house at the corner of the next lane, the low moan of the wind as it passes between buildings. All of these sounds are still there, but they have retreated as though they have stepped back out of respect for the quiet of the shop. What remains is the interior world, the room as it is, sealed and still. Edward returns to the workbench. There are a few tasks left before he can retire upstairs for the evening, and he attends to them with the unhurried manner of a man who has performed these same tasks 1,000 times before. He gathers the offcuts of pasteboard that have accumulated during the day, small triangles and crescents and narrow strips of gray board, and places them in a wooden box beneath the bench. Nothing is wasted. The larger offcuts will be used for reinforcing corners and bases of future boxes. The smallest scraps will go to the fire in the morning as kindling. He wipes the surface of the bench with the cotton cloth, removing the fine dust of cut paper and the faint residue of dried paste. The elm surface, once cleared, has a smoothness to it that is almost pleasant to touch. The grain of the wood worn by decades of use and is something that feels halfway between stone and silk. He straightens the wooden straight edge and places it alongside the shears, blade side down, at the rear of the bench. He caps the paste pot, pressing the cloth cover firmly over its mouth and securing it with a loop of twine, and he places it on the lower shelf beneath the bench where it will stay cool overnight. There's a small tin on the upper shelf, near the ledger, that contains the miniature screws and the brass clasps and the tiny hinges that Edward uses for his finer work. He reaches up and draws the tin forward just slightly to check that its lid is properly closed. It is. The lid makes a faint, metallic whisper as he slides it back into place, and the sound is immediately absorbed by the room, taken in by the paper-covered walls and the cardboard-filled shelves the way a sponge takes in water. He does this every evening, this small, unnecessary check, not because the lid has ever come open on its own, but because the motion is part of his routine, and routines, once established, have a gravity of their own that makes them as natural and unthinking as blinking. Beside the tin, there is a small tray made of lacquered wood, black with a faint border of red, in which Edward keeps his pencils. There are 3 of them, each sharpened to a clean, even point, their hexagonal bodies worn smooth by use. They are Faber pencils, a brand he has trusted for many years, and they write a clean, fine line on pasteboard that can be seen clearly in good light, but that does not show through the covering paper once the box is finished. He straightens them in their tray, aligning them so that their points all face the same direction, and this too is a part of the evening routine, a small act of ordering that contributes to the larger sense of closure of the day being properly put away. On the narrow shelf beneath the window, where the shutters have now been drawn, there sits a wooden ruler marked in inches and fractions of inches, and beside it a measuring tape of the kind used by tailors, rolled into a tight coil and held in place by a small brass clip. The measuring tape is cloth, faced with a ribbon of printed cotton, and its markings have faded somewhat over the years, though they are still perfectly legible. Edward uses this tape to take the circumference of a hat, wrapping it around the base of the crown and noting the measurement, and he uses the wooden ruler for the straight cuts on the pasteboard, laying it flat upon the board and scoring the surface with the tip of a pencil before bringing the shears in along the line. These are the tools of his trade, arranged before him in the dimming light, and each one carries the wear and warmth of long use. The shears have a particular weight in the hand, balanced between the blades and the grip in a way that allows for long cuts without fatigue. The straight edge has a beveled edge that sits flush against the pasteboard and prevents the pencil from slipping. The paste brush has bristles that have softened with age into exactly the right stiffness for applying a thin, even coat. None of these things are elegant. None are expensive. But they are, in their accumulated fitness for purpose, as refined as any instrument in a surgeon's case or a watchmaker's drawer. The room is quiet, extraordinarily quiet. The fire ticks softly in the grate. The walls, lined with their shelves of boxes, seem to absorb sound rather than reflect it, so that each small noise, the creak of a floorboard beneath Edward's heel, the faint rustle of his apron as he moves, arrives and disappears without echo or repetition. It is the particular quiet of a room that is full of paper, for paper has that quality, that capacity to soften the edges of things, to take the sharpness out of sound and return it as something gentler. Edward lights a second candle, a tallow candle in a plain brass holder, and sets it on the shelf beside the counter. The gaslight in the room is fed by a single burner mounted on the wall behind the workbench, and its flame, though steady, casts more shadow than illumination at this hour. The candle supplements it, adding a warmer, yellower tone to the room, so that the boxes on the shelves seem to glow faintly, their colored papers catching the light and holding it. He unties his apron and folds it, not carelessly, but not with particular ceremony either, and hangs it on the wooden peg beside the door that leads to the staircase. The staircase is narrow and steep, as staircases in buildings of this age tend to be, and it leads to the rooms above where Edward lives, a small sitting room and a bedroom that overlook the backs of the buildings on the adjacent lane. But he is not ready to go upstairs just yet. There is a particular pleasure in these last minutes of the working day, a quietness that belongs to the shop when it is closed and still and lit only by the fire and the candle and the low, steady hiss of the gas burner. He is sitting on the wooden stool beside the workbench, the same stool his father sat upon for nearly 30 years, and rests his hands flat on his knees. The stool is not comfortable in the way that an armchair is comfortable, but it has the comfort of familiarity, the comfort of something that holds one's weight in a way that has become second nature. He can feel the grain of the wood through the fabric of his trousers and the slight forward tilt of the seat, which his father always said was better for the back than a level surface, though Edward has never thought much about whether this is true. The wood of the stool is dark with age and polished by the slow friction of sitting, its 3 legs slightly splayed in the manner of country furniture, each one terminating in a rounded foot that has worn a shallow dimple into the floorboard beneath it. Those dimples mark the exact position where the stool has stood, evening after evening, for decades, and Edward has never thought to move it to a different spot. The dimples and the stool belong together, the way a key belongs to its lock, and any other arrangement would feel, not wrong exactly, but unsettled, the way a room feels unsettled when a picture has been taken down from its accustomed place on the wall. Somewhere above, in the ceiling of the workshop, there is a faint creak, not the sound of Edward moving, for he has not yet gone upstairs, but the natural voice of the building settling into the cold of the evening. Old buildings speak this way, especially in winter, When the temperature drops and the timber contracts and the joints between beam and floor and wall shift by fractions of an inch. It is a sound as old as the building itself, and it carries no alarm, no suggestion of distress. It is simply the house talking to itself, murmuring in the way that old things do, and the sound passes through the room and is gone, absorbed by the paper and the boxes and the quiet. Edward's breathing has slowed. He has not noticed this himself, but if someone were watching him from across the room, they would see a man completely at rest, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm so gentle and so regular that it might be the breathing of someone already half asleep. His eyes are open, but they are not focused on anything in particular. They rest upon the middle distance, upon the space between the bench and the shelves, a space occupied by nothing but air and candlelight and the faint, golden dust that hangs motionless in the warmth of the room. There was a time, years ago, when the evenings in this workshop were not so quiet. When Edwin was alive, father and son would often work late together, the two of them standing side by side at the bench, cutting and pasting and talking in the low, unhurried manner of men who have spent so many hours in one another's company that conversation has become a kind of breathing, easy and unremarkable. They would discuss the orders of the day, or the quality of a particular batch of paper, or the changing fashions in headwear that determined what sizes and shapes of box were most in demand. Edwin would sometimes tell stories of his early years in the trade, of the time he won a small medal at the great exhibition for a set of nested hat boxes covered in a paper designed by William Morris's workshop, or of a peculiar request from a duchess who wished to have a box large enough to hold a hat adorned with a stuffed bird of paradise. A box that required more pasteboard than Edwin had used in a fortnight of ordinary work. These stories came and went, and Edward listened to them with the particular attentiveness of a son who knows that his father's stories are not just stories, but the substance of a shared inheritance, the oral archive of a trade that exists as much in memory and habit as it does in ledger books and order forms. He does not tell them to himself, now that his father is gone. They exist in him the way the scent of paste exists in the walls, present but not summoned, part of the fabric of the room. From where he sits, he can see the rows of finished boxes arranged on the shelves before him. There are perhaps 40 in all, representing several weeks' worth of work. Some are waiting for collection by customers who have placed orders. Others are kept as ready-made stock, in the standard sizes and finishes that serve the most common requirements. A gentleman's top hat box, a lady's bonnet box, a traveling box with reinforced corners and a leather strap. A smaller box, sometimes called a cap box, for the less formal hats that gentlemen wear on country weekends or at the seaside. Each box is round, or very nearly so, for Edward has found over the years that a round box is stronger than a square one, the curve of the walls distributing the weight more evenly and resisting the tendency to collapse under pressure. This is not something he read in a book. It is something he discovered through trial and error and through conversations with his father, who in turn had learned it from the box makers he worked alongside in the years before he opened his own shop. The knowledge is practical and specific, the kind that belongs to a trade and is passed from hand to hand rather than from page to page. The lids of the boxes are fitted snugly, each one cut to overlap the body of the box by 1/4 of an inch, which allows for a secure closure without the need for clasps or latches on the simpler models. For the finer boxes, those intended as gifts or for the more discerning customer, Edward adds a small latch of pressed tin, manufactured by a firm in Birmingham, and a loop of ribbon or cord to serve as a handle. The process of fitting the latch is delicate work, requiring a small awl to pierce the pasteboard and a set of miniature screws that Edward keeps in a tin on the upper shelf. It is work best done in good light and with steady hands, and so it is work he reserves for the morning hours, when both are most reliable. He is not thinking about any of this now, not in any deliberate way. His mind is simply resting upon the room, upon the shapes and colors and textures that surround him, the way one's gaze rests upon a familiar landscape without the need to name each hill or stream. The sage green paper on the roll against the wall, the soft ivory boxes with their gold lattice pattern, the stack of lids, not yet matched to their bodies, leaning against one another like plates in a dresser. The single roll of brown paper, plain and serviceable, that he uses for the boxes that go to the trade, the hatters and milliners who order in bulk and care more for function than for appearance. The fire shifts again, and a piece of coal settles with a soft, prolonged hiss, as though it is exhaling. A thin thread of blue flame dances briefly along the edge of the coal before vanishing. Edward watches it without particular interest, the way one watches the slow movement of clouds or the drift of smoke from a chimney. It is simply there, happening, and then it is not. Beyond the shuttered window, the evening continues. The sounds of the lane have grown quieter still as the hour draws on and the foot traffic diminishes. Somewhere, perhaps in the building next door, or perhaps in the one beyond, a clock strikes the hour, its chime muffled by walls and distance into something that is more felt than heard. Edward does not count the strokes. He knows what time it is, more or less, by the state of the fire and the quality of the silence, and the exact hour does not concern him. He reaches across the bench and picks up a small piece of pasteboard, a square about 4 inches across, that he cut earlier in the day as a sample for a customer who wished to see the thickness and quality of the board before placing an order. He turns it over in his hands, feeling its weight and its smooth, cool surface. Pasteboard is a simple material, nothing more than layers of paper pasted together and pressed until they form a stiff, dense sheet, but there is a satisfaction in its solidity, in the way it holds its shape and resists the pressure of one's thumb. This particular board came from a merchant on Carter Lane, near St. Paul's Cathedral, who supplies several of the box makers in this part of London. It is a good board, consistent in thickness and free of the soft spots and air pockets that can plague cheaper grades. Edward has been buying from the same merchant for 12 years, and the quality has remained steady, which is all one can ask of a supplier in a trade where the materials are not glamorous, but where their reliability is everything. He sets the sample down and lets his hands rest again. The room is very still now. The gas burner hisses its quiet, constant note, a sound so familiar that it has become indistinguishable from silence. The candle on the shelf beside the counter burns with a flame that barely moves, a tiny spear of yellow light that throws a faint shadow of the paste pot across the surface of the lower shelf. The air in the room is warm and close, carrying the accumulated scent of the day's work. The starchy sweetness of paste, the dry, clean smell of cut paper, the faint tang of the coal fire, and beneath it all, the deep, papery scent of the boxes themselves, dozens of them, each one contributing its own subtle note to the atmosphere. It is the kind of air that seems to hold time and place, to slow it, so that a minute spent sitting on this stool feels longer and fuller than a minute spent anywhere else. And perhaps it is why Edward lingers. Not because there is anything left to do, but because the room, in its closed and quiet state, offers a particular kind of peace that the rooms upstairs, comfortable though they are, cannot quite replicate. This is his workshop, his father's workshop before him, and the walls know the work that has been done within them the way an old garden knows the seasons that have passed through it. He stands slowly and crosses the room to check the fire. The coal scuttle beside the grate is a small, blackened vessel of pressed iron, and it still holds enough coal for the morning, which is all he needs. He does not add fuel to the fire now. Instead, he takes the small iron poker from its hook on the wall and nudges the remaining coals into a tighter arrangement, banking the fire so that it will burn low through the night and leave a bed of embers in the morning that can be coaxed back to life with a few sticks of kindling and a fresh lump or two of coal. The poker makes a soft, scraping sound against the grate, metal on cast iron, and the coals respond with a brief brightening, a flare of orange light that sends long, slow shadows across the walls before settling back to their steady, subdued glow. He returns the poker to its hook and stands before the fire for a moment, feeling its warmth against the front of his waistcoat. The waistcoat is a plain, dark gray wool buttoned to the chest, and it carries the faint imprint of his working posture. A slight crease at the front where he leans over the bench, a tiny spot of dried paste near the left pocket where he once reached for a pencil with pasted fingers. These are not marks of carelessness. They are the ordinary accumulations of a working life, as natural to the garment as the patina of age on the brass door handle. Edward's gaze drifts to the corner of the room, near the fire, where a small stack of boxes stands apart from the rest. These are not finished boxes and not customer orders. They are samples and experiments, boxes he has made over the years to test a new paper or a different method of joining or an unusual shape that came to him during a quiet afternoon. There is one box among them, a deep-sided oval covered in a wallpaper of soft blue with a pattern of trailing ivy that he made the year his father died. He does not remember deciding to make it. He simply found himself at the bench one February morning, cutting board and mixing paste, and by the end of the day, the box was done. It has never held a hat. It has never been offered for sale. It simply sits in the corner, among the others, and Edward has never considered moving it. The wind outside has picked up slightly, and a low sound moves along the lane, a steady breath of cold air that passes between the buildings and presses gently against the shutters. The shutters hold. They are well made, fitted snugly to the window frame by a carpenter whose name Edward has forgotten, but whose work has endured. The sound of the wind is muffled to a whisper, a long, soft exhalation that rises and falls in slow intervals, as though the night itself is breathing. Edward turns from the fire and moves back to the workbench. He opens the small ledger that sits on the shelf behind the counter and looks at the entries for the day. There are 3. The first is the order from the clerk on Threadneedle Street, noted in Edward's careful hand with the dimensions of the hat and the date by which the box is required. The second is a standing order from a milliner on Bond Street, Mrs. Arabella Fitch, who takes a dozen plain bonnet boxes each month and has done so for the past 4 years. The third is a small note to himself, a reminder to order a fresh supply of the sage green paper, as the current roll is nearing its end. He closes the ledger and returns it to its place. The act of reading the entries brief as they are, has a settling effect, like the final paragraph of a letter that confirms what has already been understood. The day's business is recorded. The orders are noted. There is nothing that needs to be remembered or worried over. All is in hand. He picks up the roll of grosgrain ribbon from the bench and winds it back into a neat coil, tucking the loose end beneath the outermost layer to keep it from unraveling. The ribbon is smooth beneath his fingers, its ribbed texture catching faintly on the dry skin of his thumb. He places the coil in a shallow drawer beneath the bench, alongside several other coils in different colors: a burgundy, a deep navy, a forest green, and a soft gray that he uses for the planter boxes. The drawer is lined with a sheet of tissue paper, yellowed with age, that rustles faintly as the ribbon settles into place. The drawer closes with a quiet, satisfying click, the sound of a well-fitted joint meeting its partner. It is one of those small, domestic sounds that one barely notices during the busy hours of the day, but that becomes strangely distinct in the evening quiet, as though the room is composing its own music from the ordinary materials at hand. Edward takes a last look around the workshop. Everything is in its place. The shears on the bench, blades closed now. The straight edge beside them. The paste pot on its shelf, covered and sealed. The offcut box beneath the bench, holding its collection of scraps. The finished boxes on the shelves, each one waiting quietly for its purpose to be fulfilled. The sample roll of sage green paper leaning against the wall. The candle burning steadily on its shelf. The gas burner hissing its low, constant note. The fire banked and glowing, breathing out its warmth. He reaches for the gas tap on the wall and turns it half a degree to the left, reducing the flame to a bare flicker. The room darkens by half, the shadows deepening along the walls and pooling in the corners, and the boxes on the shelves lose their color and become instead a series of soft, rounded shapes, their outlines barely distinguishable in the candlelight. It is a gentle dimming, not a sudden darkness, and the room absorbs it gracefully, as though it has been waiting for this moment, this gradual retreat from the brightness of the working day into the subdued calm of evening. Edward picks up the candle holder and carries it with him as he moves towards the door to the staircase. But he pauses at the workbench, and for a moment he simply stands there, the candle in one hand and the other hand resting lightly on the elm surface. The wood is warm from the day. The surface is smooth. Beneath his fingertips, he can feel the faintest impressions of the cuts and scratches that decades of work have left upon it, a kind of braille that tells the story of every box that has ever been made on this bench, every hat that has ever been measured, every ribbon that has ever been cut. And in this pause, in this quiet moment of contact between hand and workbench, the room seems to settle even further, as though the building itself is exhaling, releasing the last traces of the day's energy and preparing for the long, still hours of the night. The boxes on the shelves stand motionless. The fire breathes. The wind sighs against the shutters. And Edward simply stands, not thinking, not planning, not remembering, just standing in the particular stillness that comes when the work is done and the evening has arrived, and there is nothing left but the gentle, unremarkable act of being present in a room where one has spent the better part of one's life. There is a particular quality to cardboard, to pasteboard and cut paper and pasted surfaces that makes them extraordinarily peaceful things to be around. They do not glitter or shine. They do not demand attention. They sit upon their shelves with a quiet self-sufficiency, holding their shapes without effort, their surfaces absorbing light rather than reflecting it. A room full of paper products has a hush to it that is different from the silence of an empty room. It is a populated silence, a silence that contains the presence of many finished objects, each one resting in its completed state, each one having arrived at the end of its making and settled into the stillness that follows. This is the silence that surrounds Edward now. 40 hat boxes, each one round and lidded and covered in its particular paper, each one carrying the memory of its making and the alignment of its seams and the tension of its ribbon handle and the precise fit of its lid upon its body. They're simple objects. They serve a simple purpose. And yet, in the candlelight, in the gentle warmth of the banked fire, they possess a quiet dignity that seems, for a moment, to be exactly enough. Edward lifts his hand from the bench and turns towards the staircase door. The candle flame tilts as he moves, casting a brief, shifting light across the ceiling, and then steadies as he stops at the threshold. The staircase beyond is dark and narrow, its treads creaking with the particular voice that old timber has, a low groan that is less a sound of complaint than of acknowledgement. He has heard these stairs speak every evening for more than 20 years, and the sound is as familiar to him as the sound of his own breathing. But before he goes, he turns back one last time and looks at the room. It is nearly dark now, the gas burner reduced to its lowest flame, the fire a bed of dull embers, the candle in his hand the only moving light. The boxes on the shelves are barely visible, their shapes suggested rather than seen, their colors given back to the darkness. The workbench is a broad, flat shadow in the center of the room, and the tools upon it, the shears, the straight edge, the brush, are indistinct, their outlines merging with the surface on which they rest. It is a beautiful room in its way, not beautiful in the manner of a drawing room or a gallery, but beautiful in the manner of a place that has been used well and cared for steadily and filled over many years with the particular grace that comes from repetition and precision and the quiet satisfaction of making things by hand. The walls have absorbed the work. The air carries its scent. The silence holds its rhythm. Edward steps through the doorway and begins to climb the stairs, the candle flame lighting his way, and the shop below settles into the deeper quiet of the night. The fire glows. The boxes rest. The shutters hold the cold at bay, and beyond them, the winter evening continues its slow and unhurried course over the rooftops of London. Upstairs, the rooms are small but not uncomfortable. The sitting room contains a single armchair upholstered in a faded green velvet that has worn thin at the arms, and a small table upon which sits a lamp, an oil lamp, for the upper floors of the building are not fitted with gas, and a book that Edward has been reading in the evenings, a volume of essays by a writer whose name is not important, whose prose is calm and measured and suits the mood of these quiet hours. There's a rug on the floor, a turkey rug in reds and blues that was a gift from a customer many years ago, and a small bookcase against the wall that holds perhaps 24 volumes, mostly of a practical or historical nature, along with a Bible and a book of common prayer that belonged to Edward's mother. But we are not staying upstairs with Edward this evening. Our place is downstairs, in the workshop, in the room of boxes and pasteboard and the dying fire. So let us remain there, in the gentle dark, and let the silence of the room close around us like the lid of a well-made hat box, snug and secure and perfectly fitted. The gas burner still hisses, just barely, its flame a blue-white thread no larger than the tip of a needle. It gives almost no light, but it gives a sound, a constant, unwavering note that the room has learned to incorporate into its silence the way a river incorporates the sound of its own current. You could listen to it for a long while without it becoming tiresome. It is a sound without meaning, without demand, a sound that simply is, and that asks nothing of the listener but to let it continue. The fire in the grate has settled further. The coals have lost their orange glow and have taken on a deeper, darker red, the color of old brick or dried clay. They still give off heat. The room is still warm, noticeably warmer than the lane outside. But the heat is gentler now, less insistent, more like the warmth of a blanket than the warmth of a flame. Every few minutes, a coal shifts, and there's a small sound, a quiet tick or a soft crunch, and then the fire is still again. The boxes on the shelves are utterly still. They have no reason to move. They are solid, lidded, closed, and the air around them is motionless. If you were to reach out and touch one of them in the dark, you would feel the smooth surface of the covering paper, cool to the touch but not cold, and beneath it the firm, unyielding pasteboard. And if you were to lift the lid, you would hear the soft, intimate sound of cardboard releasing from cardboard, a gentle exhale of enclosed air that carries with it the faint scent of the interior, a scent of newsprint and paste, and the particular, indefinable smell of a space that has been sealed. But no one is reaching out. No one is lifting lids. The room is alone with itself, its contents resting in the positions they were left in, its sounds reduced to the minimum that an occupied building can achieve. The hiss of the gas, the occasional settling of the fire, the low moan of the wind beyond the shutters, and the vast, encompassing quiet that lies beneath and between and around all of these, holding them together the way paste holds paper to pasteboard. And this is where you are, too. Not standing in a room, exactly, but resting within it, the way a thought rests within the mind before sleep. You are surrounded by the shapes of boxes. You are warmed by the dying fire. You are held by the quiet, and the quiet is holding you gently without grip or pressure, the way a well-made box holds the hat it was built to protect, securely, but softly, with just enough space for the thing inside to breathe. If you could look closely at the shelves in this low, warm light, you would notice the small variations that distinguish one box from another, not just in size and color, but in the subtler details that reveal the hand of their maker. The seam on one box runs vertically along the back, nearly invisible, the edges of the paper overlapping by no more than 1/8 of an inch, and the paste beneath holding them so flat that even a fingertip drawn across the join would struggle to detect the transition. On another, the lid bears a faint circular impression where the base of a teacup was once set down during a brief pause in the work, a mark so slight that only someone who knew to look for it would ever find it, and which Edward has never bothered to correct because it is on the underside of the lid and will never be seen. These are the small, invisible histories of handmade things, the traces of their making that persist in the finished object like the memory of a conversation persists in the mind long after the words themselves have been forgotten. Every box in this room carries such traces. The slight unevenness of a ribbon handle where the paste was applied a fraction too thickly on one side. The faint pencil line on the interior of a lid, the measuring mark that was meant to be erased but was missed in the final inspection. The barely perceptible difference in paper tone between two boxes covered from the same roll, one pasted on a morning when the light was bright, and the other on an afternoon when the gray of the sky had deepened the apparent shade by half a degree. None of these things matter in any practical sense. The boxes function as they should. They hold hats. They protect brims. They stack neatly and carry easily and close with a secure, satisfying fit. But they matter in another sense, a quieter one, because they are evidence of the fact that these boxes were made by a person in a particular room on particular days with particular light and particular air and the particular state of mind that accompanies any act of patient, focused work. They are not products of a machine. They are products of a morning or an afternoon or a long, quiet session at the bench with the fire burning and the gas lamp hissing and the sounds of the lane filtering through the shutters. And there is something deeply restful about that, about the knowledge that the objects around you were made slowly, one at a time, by hands that moved without haste, that the ribbon was measured and cut with a single, deliberate motion, that the paste was stirred and applied and smoothed, that the paper was lifted and laid and pressed, and that the pressing was done with the flat of the palm, slowly, working from the center outward, coaxing the paper into its final position against the curve of the pasteboard wall. These are the sounds and motions that filled this room during the day, and though they are gone now, replaced by the quiet of evening, they have left their impression upon the air the way a footprint leaves its impression in soft ground. The room remembers them. The bench remembers them. The boxes, in their finished stillness, remember the hands that made them. And if you listen very carefully, if you let your mind grow very quiet and very still, you can almost hear the echo of those sounds, the soft scrape of the straight edge, the clean bite of the shears, the gentle, rhythmic brush of paste being applied to paper, still present, still real, still quietly part of the room. The minutes pass. They have no particular character. They are simply minutes, arriving and departing in their usual fashion, unannounced and unremarked. Outside, the gas lamp on the lane flickers briefly as a gust of wind catches its glass and then steadies. The mist continues to drift between the buildings, slow and silent, carrying with it the cold of the river and the faint, smoky tang of 1,000 coal fires burning in the homes and shops of the city. London is still awake somewhere. There are carriages still moving through the larger streets, and the public houses are still lit, and somewhere a lamplighter is making his final round, his ladder balanced on his shoulder and his long pole swinging gently at his side. But all of that is far away, and it belongs to a world that has nothing to do with this room. The lane outside the shop is nearly empty now. A solitary figure passes, collar turned up against the cold, his footsteps sharp and quick on the wet cobblestones, and then he is gone, and the lane is still again. A cat crosses from one side to the other, moving with the unhurried confidence of an animal that considers the night to be its own, and disappears beneath the steps of a building opposite. The gas lamp burns on, indifferent to the traffic or the lack of it, its flames steady and faithful in its glass enclosure, casting its small circle of greenish light upon the pavement below. Inside the shop, the quiet has reached a depth that seems almost tangible, as though it could be held in the hand like a smooth stone or a folded piece of cloth. It fills the spaces between the boxes on the shelves. It rests upon the surface of the workbench. It gathers in the corners of the room where the candlelight does not reach, and it lies, thick and warm, over everything, the way fresh snow lies upon a garden, muffling every edge and softening every sound. But here, in this room, in this small, shuttered workshop on a narrow lane south of Oxford Street, the world outside has become an abstraction, a rumor, something that exists only in the muffled sounds that occasionally reach through the walls and the shutters and the accumulated layers of paper and pasteboard. The shelves are patient. The boxes are patient. The bench is patient, its elm surface still faintly warm from the day's work, its surface bearing the marks of a craft that is, at its heart, an exercise in patience. You cannot rush the making of a hat box. The paste must be mixed to the correct consistency. The board must be cut to precise measurements. The paper must be smoothed without wrinkles or bubbles. The ribbon must be measured and cut and folded and attached with the right amount of adhesive and the right amount of pressure and the right amount of time. Each step follows the one before it, and each step takes exactly as long as it takes, no more and no less. This is the rhythm of the room, and it is a gentle rhythm, a slow and steady pulse that has nothing to do with urgency or ambition. It is the rhythm of craft, of the hand that knows its material, and the eye that knows its line, and the mind that has learned over many years to find satisfaction in the particular, the specific, the carefully done. It is a rhythm that is very much like breathing, if you think about it. One breath follows another, and each one is sufficient, and together they form the quiet, continuous thread that holds a life in place. And your breathing now is very much like that. Slow and steady and sufficient. Each breath arriving without effort. Each exhale carrying away a little more of whatever weight the day may have placed upon you. You are sinking into the quiet of this room the way the warmth of the fire sinks into the walls, slowly and thoroughly, until the two become indistinguishable. You are surrounded by the gentle presence of finished things, of objects that have been made and completed and set aside, and there's a deep comfort in that, in knowing that everything in this room has reached its proper state and will remain there undisturbed through the long, still night. The candle upstairs, in Edward's sitting room, is burning. He has settled into his armchair and opened his book, and his eyes are moving across the page in the slow, contented way of a man who reads not to learn or to be entertained, but simply because the act of reading is, in itself, a form of rest. The words on the page are not important. What matters is the rhythm of the reading, the steady, unhurried passage of one sentence into the next, and the gentle way the lamplight falls across the page, warm and golden and perfectly still. But downstairs in the workshop the quiet deepens. The gas flame flickers once, so faintly that the movement is almost imaginary, and then holds steady. The coals in the grate have darkened further, their glow now visible only at the very center, where a single point of amber light persists like a small, patient star. The boxes stand on their shelves in the dark, their lids fitted, their handles at rest, their surfaces cool and smooth and silent. The air in the room is still. Perfectly, completely still. It carries its scents without moving. The faint sweetness of paste, the dry warmth of paper, the deeper, earthier note of the coal smoke that has settled into the fabric of the walls and the curtain that hangs behind the counter and the canvas of Edward's apron on its peg by the door. These scents layer one upon another without mixing, each one distinct, each one contributing to the atmosphere of the room the way the colors of the boxes contribute to the appearance of the shelves, individually subtle, collectively rich. And somewhere in this stillness, in this room of paper and paste and gently dying firelight, time has begun to behave the way time does in the very late evening, when the mind is no longer keeping track of it, and the body has surrendered to the warmth and the quiet. It slows. It stretches. It loses its edges, the way the colors of the boxes have lost their edges in the dark. And what remains is not the passage of minutes or hours, but something softer, something more like the long, slow drift of sleep itself, arriving without announcement, settling over the mind the way the mist has settled over the lane outside. You are warm. You are still. You are held by the quiet of this room, this small, careful room where a man and his father before him have spent their working lives measuring and cutting and pasting and folding, making boxes to hold the hats that gentlemen and ladies were to keep the weather from their heads and the world at a proper distance. It is a modest purpose, it is an ordinary craft. And yet in the stillness of this evening, it seems to be exactly enough, exactly the right thing to be doing in the world. And the boxes that line the shelves seem to agree, standing in their rows with the quiet assurance of objects that know what they are and are content to be precisely that. The wind outside has dropped. The mist lies still upon the lane. The gas lamp burns its steady, greenish flame, illuminating the cobblestones and the doorstep and the small brass plate beside the door that reads E. Hadwell Son. And inside, behind the shutters, behind the door, behind the counter, and the bench and the shelves of neatly stacked boxes, the workshop rests, and the fire breathes its last warm breaths, and the night, the long and quiet night, fills the room like water filling a bowl, gently, completely, and without a single sound. Thank you so much for being here tonight and spending these quiet moments in the hat box maker's workshop. If this was relaxing for you and the silence of the room helped you drift off to sleep, that's wonderful, and I'm very happy about it. You can be here anytime you need a calm and peaceful place to close your eyes. If you enjoyed this story, you can leave a quiet thought in the comments below, or perhaps, if you haven't already, you can consider subscribing to the channel to always be notified when a new story is ready. But no rush, no obligation, just the silence, the warmth, and the steady, patient presence of a room that will be there whenever you need it. Remember, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. Good night.